My dad said things will be back to normal when your brother's business takes off after secretly listing my cottage as collateral for his loan. I showed him the foreclosure papers and said look like it didn't. I bought a small vacation cottage in Vermont 3 years ago. It's my pride and joy, a cozy 2-bedroom place near a lake where I go to decompress from city life. I saved for years to buy it outright. No mortgage, completely mine, or so I thought. My family consists of my parents Robert 58M and Patricia 55F, and my younger brother Jeremy 28M. Jeremy has always been the golden child, the creative one who could do no wrong. 2 years ago, he convinced our parents to help him open an upscale farm restaurant in our hometown. I wasn't involved in any of the planning or financing discussions, which I thought was normal since it was Jeremy's venture. Yesterday, I received a certified letter that made my blood run cold. It was a foreclosure notice on my cottage. According to the documents, my property had been used as collateral for a $150,000 business loan that was now in default. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings, and I had 30 days to respond. I immediately called the bank, thinking there had been some terrible mistake. That's when I learned the horrifying truth. 18 months ago, someone had forged my signature on loan documents using my cottage as collateral for Jeremy's restaurant loan. The bank had copies of what appeared to be my identification and signed agreements. I was listed as a co-borrower on a loan I never knew existed. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I demanded to see all the documentation immediately. The loan officer, clearly uncomfortable, agreed to meet with me this morning. When I reviewed the paperwork, I saw my forged signature on multiple documents. Someone had used photocopies of my driver's license and social security card. The handwriting was close, but not quite right. More disturbing, the contact information listed wasn't even mine. It was my parents' address and a phone number I didn't recognize. I confronted my parents immediately. The conversation was a nightmare. They didn't deny what they'd done. Instead, they tried to justify it. Jeremy needed help, my mother said, crying. The restaurant is family legacy. We thought you'd understand. My father added that they'd intended to tell me eventually, but the restaurant was supposed to be profitable by now. Jeremy wasn't there during this conversation, but when I called him, he claimed he had no idea they'd used my property. He said he thought our parents had put up their own house as collateral. I don't know whether to believe him. The worst part, Jeremy's restaurant has been hemorrhaging money from day one. Poor location, overpriced menu, terrible management. It's been closed for 3 months, unable to pay rent or suppliers. The loan payments stopped 4 months ago, which triggered the foreclosure process. I've contacted a lawyer, but I'm terrified. This is my cottage we're talking about. My sanctuary, my biggest asset, my future retirement plan. I bought it with money I saved working 60-hour weeks for years. The thought of losing it because of my family's deception is making me physically sick. My parents keep calling, begging me to work something out and not destroy the family over this. They suggested I could take over the loan payments and save Jeremy's restaurant. They don't seem to understand that the restaurant is already dead and that what they did was fraud. I feel completely betrayed. How do you forgive family for something like this? How do you move forward when the people who raised you were willing to steal your future to fund their favorite child's failing dream? Has anyone dealt with anything like this? What are my legal options? Can I really lose my cottage because of someone else's forged signature? I'm desperate for any advice. Update 1. 3 weeks later. The situation has exploded beyond anything I could have imagined. Thank you to everyone who provided advice and support on my original post. The legal advice to document everything and act quickly probably saved my cottage. First, the good news. My lawyer believes we have a strong case. The forgery is obvious to a handwriting expert, and the bank's failure to verify my identity before accepting the loan creates liability on their end. We filed a police report for identity theft and fraud, and the bank has agreed to halt foreclosure proceedings while we investigate. Now the bad news. My family has completely lost their minds. When I filed the police report, my parents showed up at my apartment at 6 a.m. screaming about how I was destroying the family and sending them to prison. My mother was hysterical, claiming I was going to give my father a heart attack. My father demanded I drop all charges and handle this like family. The conversation went exactly as you'd expect. They kept insisting that what they did wasn't really fraud because family helps family, and they always intended to pay it back. When I pointed out that intent doesn't matter when you forge someone's signature and steal their property, my father got aggressive. You've always been selfish, he said. Jeremy needed help, and you would have said no because you're jealous of his success. Success. The restaurant that's been closed for months and owes money to half the suppliers in town. I was speechless. My mother tried a different approach, guilt-tripping me about how much they'd sacrificed for me growing up. She brought up piano lessons from 20 years ago and helping me with college expenses, as if raising your child creates a blank check to commit fraud against them as an adult. Jeremy finally showed up at my apartment 2 days later. This conversation was even worse. He admitted he knew about the cottage being used as collateral. "I thought you'd be okay with it," he said, as if that makes it better. "You make good money, and you don't even use the cottage that much." When I told him I use it every other weekend and had planned to retire there, he actually laughed. "Come on, Matt, you're 30. Retirement is decades away. I needed the money now for something real." Something real. My cottage apparently isn't real, but his failed restaurant is. The worst part was his proposal for fixing things. He suggested I should take over the loan payments, all $150,000 of them, and become his business partner in relaunching the restaurant. He had this whole delusional plan about how we could rebrand it, move to a better location, and turn it profitable together. I told him absolutely not. The restaurant lost money from day one. He has no business experience, and I'm not throwing good money after bad. His response: "I can't believe you're going to let me lose everything over money." Let him lose everything, as if I had any role in his poor decisions. My parents have now enlisted extended family to pressure me. I've received calls from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all telling me variations of the same thing. Family should stick together. I'm being too harsh. I should consider Jeremy's future, and I'm overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. My cousin Sandra actually had the nerve to suggest that since I'm single with no kids, I don't need the cottage as much as Jeremy needs his restaurant dreams. Apparently, being unmarried means I don't deserve to own property. The family pressure campaign reached its peak at my grandmother's 85th birthday party last weekend. I almost didn't go, but I didn't want to disappoint her. Bad decision. My parents had clearly briefed everyone on their version of events, painting me as the vindictive brother trying to send them to prison over a simple family loan. Jeremy gave a speech about family loyalty and supporting each other's dreams, making pointed eye contact with me throughout. Several relatives approached me afterwards, suggesting I should be the bigger person and find a way to help Jeremy keep his restaurant dreams alive. My grandmother, who I adore, pulled me aside and gently suggested that maybe there was a compromise that could keep the family together. When I explained that they'd committed fraud and stolen my property, she looked confused and said, "But honey, Jeremy just needed help with his business." I realized they've been feeding everyone a sanitized version where they simply co-signed a loan to help Jeremy, and now I'm being unreasonable about repayment terms. The fact that they forged my signature and stole my property has been conveniently omitted from their family narrative. I ended up leaving the party early, but not before my father cornered me in the hallway. "You're tearing this family apart," he said. "Is that cottage really worth more to you than your brother's future and your parents' freedom?" "Yes, actually it is. I've now retained a second lawyer who specializes in family fraud cases. We're pursuing both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. The bank's internal investigation has revealed that this isn't their first questionable loan. Apparently, my parents provided references and documentation that painted me as an eager co-signer who was simply too busy to come to the closing in person. My lawyer says we should have a resolution within a few months, but the emotional toll is devastating. I've essentially lost my entire family over this. They can't understand why I won't just absorb the loss and move on for the good of the family. But here's what they don't understand. This isn't just about money. They stole from me. They betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible. They were willing to sacrifice my financial future for Jeremy's pipe dream. And they never even considered asking me first because they knew I'd say no. The cottage isn't just a building to me. It represents years of hard work, sacrifice, and planning. It's my escape from the stress of city life, my retirement plan, and my proof that I can build something meaningful. They were willing to gamble all of that away without even telling me. I'm standing firm. Family doesn't justify fraud, and love doesn't excuse theft. They made their choice when they forged my signature. Now they get to live with the consequences. Update 2. 3 months later. The legal situation has progressed significantly, though not in ways I expected. My lawyer warned me that family fraud cases often uncover additional deceptions. And unfortunately, he was right. The bank's internal investigation revealed that my parents have been running a much larger scheme than just the cottage situation. Over the past 3 years, they've taken out multiple loans using various family properties and assets as collateral, including my grandmother's house and my deceased grandfather's small business property that was supposed to be held in trust. Here's where it gets complicated. My grandmother wasn't just a victim of confusion at her birthday party. She actually signed documents giving my parents power of attorney over her finances 2 years ago, ostensibly to help her manage bills and medical expenses as she aged. My parents used that authority to mortgage her house without her understanding what she was signing. The grandfather's business property situation is even more complex. When he died 5 years ago, the property was supposed to be held in trust for all grandchildren, but my parents somehow gained control and used it as collateral for another of Jeremy's failed business ventures. Apparently, the restaurant wasn't his first entrepreneurial disaster. My lawyer contacted my cousins about these discoveries, and now there's a family-wide investigation happening. It turns out my parents have been funding Jeremy's various business attempts for years using other people's assets. The restaurant was just the latest in a string of failed ventures, including a food truck, a catering business, and some kind of artisan soap company. Jeremy's response to these revelations has been enlightening. When confronted with evidence that his business ventures were funded through fraud against multiple family members, he claimed he thought our parents were simply good at getting loans and never questioned where the money came from. This strains credibility since Jeremy was present at several loan meetings and signed documents himself. My lawyer believes he was complicit in at least some of the fraud, though proving his knowledge and intent is more complicated than proving my parents' direct actions. The family dynamics have completely imploded. My cousins are furious about the grandfather's property being used without their knowledge. My grandmother is confused and hurt, not fully understanding how her house became collateral for Jeremy's business loans. Several relatives who initially pressured me to work things out are now dealing with their own financial losses. My Uncle David, grandfather's youngest son, is particularly angry. He'd been making plans to purchase the business property from the trust to expand his own construction company, only to discover it was already mortgaged to the hilt. He's now joining our lawsuit and has been very vocal about my parents' betrayal of family trust. Jeremy has made several attempts to contact me directly, alternating between apology and anger. His latest strategy is trying to frame himself as another victim of our parents' scheming. He claims he never understood the legal complexities and thought our parents were simply using their own assets to help him succeed. This might be more believable if not for the evidence that Jeremy personally signed loan documents and was present at multiple bank meetings. He also lived far beyond his means during this period, buying a new car, taking expensive vacations, and renting a luxury apartment while his businesses hemorrhaged money. Meanwhile, my parents have hired their own lawyer and are now claiming that everything they did was authorized and that the family is overreacting to normal business practices. Their lawyer sent a letter suggesting that the power of attorney documents and trust arrangements gave them broad authority to make financial decisions for the family's benefit. This argument falls apart quickly when you consider that forging my signature was never authorized under any document, and that using my grandmother's house as collateral for Jeremy's failing restaurant hardly seems like sound financial management for her benefit. The criminal investigation is proceeding slowly but steadily. The prosecutor's office is treating this as a complex white-collar fraud case involving multiple victims and properties. They've frozen several bank accounts and placed liens on properties to prevent further unauthorized transactions. On a personal level, I'm doing better than I expected. The initial betrayal was devastating, but seeing the full scope of my parents' deception has actually made it easier to maintain distance. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a misguided attempt to help Jeremy. It was a systematic pattern of stealing from family members to fund a series of doomed business ventures. My cottage is safe. The bank agreed to remove it from the fraudulent loan once our handwriting expert confirmed the forged signature. I've had new locks installed and updated my security system, partly for practical reasons and partly for the psychological benefit of knowing it's truly secure. I spent last weekend there for the first time since this all started, and it felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. The fall foliage was spectacular, and I sat on the deck with my coffee feeling grateful for my lawyer's advice to act quickly and document everything. Several family members have reached out to apologize for their initial pressure to reconcile. My cousin Sandra, who suggested I didn't need the cottage, as much as Jeremy needed his dreams, called to express regret for not understanding the full situation. She's now dealing with her own questions about whether my parents used her late father's inheritance appropriately. The hardest part is watching my grandmother struggle with this. She's sharp for 85, but the complexity of the financial fraud and the legal proceedings are overwhelming. She keeps asking why her own son would put her house at risk, and I don't have good answers. She's moved in with my Uncle David temporarily while lawyers sort out the property issues. Looking ahead, my lawyer expects the criminal case to be resolved within 6 months, probably with plea agreements rather than trials. The civil cases will take longer as we're trying to trace years of fraudulent transactions and determine what can be recovered. Jeremy's restaurant space was auctioned off last month to pay creditors. He's moved back in with my parents and is reportedly working as a line cook at a chain restaurant. I feel no satisfaction in his downfall, but I also feel no obligation to help him rebuild after years of his entitled behavior. I'm building new family relationships with the cousins and relatives who support accountability over blind loyalty. My Uncle David and I have grown closer through this shared experience of betrayal and legal battles. It's not the family I grew up with, but it's a family based on mutual respect rather than enabling destructive behavior. The cottage stands as a reminder that sometimes protecting yourself requires standing up to the people closest to you. I saved for years to buy that place, and I was right to fight for it. No one has the right to gamble away your future, even if they raised you. Update 3. 6 months later, final. The legal proceedings have finally concluded, and the resolution was both more complex and more satisfying than I anticipated. What started as a simple case of mortgage fraud evolved into a comprehensive investigation that revealed the true scope of my parents' financial deceptions. The criminal case ended with plea agreements. My parents pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and elder abuse related to my grandmother's house. My father received 18 months in federal prison, while my mother got 12 months plus 2 years of supervised probation. Jeremy was charged as a co-conspirator on 2 of the loans where evidence showed he clearly knew the collateral was obtained fraudulently. He accepted a plea deal for 6 months in county jail plus restitution obligations. Jeremy's sentencing hearing was particularly revealing. When given the opportunity to address the court, he spent most of his time explaining how his entrepreneurial dreams had been crushed by family members who didn't believe in his vision. Even facing jail time, he couldn't take responsibility for participating in fraud. The judge was notably unimpressed, commenting that legitimate business ventures don't require forged signatures and stolen collateral. The civil proceedings resulted in substantial financial recoveries, though not everything could be made whole. My cottage was fully cleared of any liens or claims. It's mine free and clear exactly as it should have been all along. My grandmother's house was refinanced with a legitimate loan that she actually signed for and understood with my Uncle David as co-signer to ensure manageable payments. The grandfather's business property situation was more complicated. Years of fraudulent loans had created multiple competing claims, but we eventually worked out a settlement that allowed my Uncle David to purchase the property at below market value while using the proceeds to pay off the fraudulent debts. It wasn't ideal, but it kept the property in the family and ensured David could proceed with his expansion plans. The most surprising development came during the bank's internal investigation. It turns out my parents had attempted similar schemes with other families using Jeremy's business needs as justification for increasingly elaborate fraud schemes. The bank identified at least 4 other cases where they'd accepted questionable documentation and failed to verify co-signer identities properly. This led to a larger settlement with the bank, which was eager to avoid regulatory scrutiny and public attention. While I can't discuss the specific terms due to confidentiality agreements, I can say that all victims received compensation beyond the mere recovery of their properties. Jeremy's various business failures were thoroughly documented during the proceedings. The restaurant lost money from its first month of operation due to poor location, overpriced menu items, and Jeremy's complete lack of management experience. The food truck failed because Jeremy bought an overpriced vehicle and never secured proper permits. The catering business collapsed when Jeremy took customer deposits but failed to show up for events, claiming creative differences with clients who wanted traditional food instead of his experimental cuisine. The artisan soap company was perhaps the most absurd venture. Jeremy invested thousands in equipment and ingredients but never researched regulations for cosmetic products. His entire inventory was seized by health inspectors after customers reported skin reactions. The business lasted 6 weeks. The pattern was consistent. Jeremy would get excited about a new concept, convince our parents to fund it through fraudulent means, ignore basic business planning, blame others when things went wrong, and move on to the next dream without taking responsibility for the losses. My parents' motivation became clearer through their testimony and psychological evaluations. They were desperately trying to prove that Jeremy could succeed at something, anything, to validate their decision to focus all their support on their creative son while expecting me to be self-sufficient. Each business failure made them more determined to find a venture that would finally prove Jeremy's worth, leading to increasingly risky and illegal funding methods. During my mother's sentencing hearing, she finally offered what seemed like a genuine apology. She acknowledged that their favoritism had been unfair and that their desperation to help Jeremy succeed had led them to betray other family members' trust. She also admitted that they'd convinced themselves the fraud was temporary. They truly believed Jeremy's next business would be successful enough to pay everyone back before anyone noticed. My father was less repentant. Even in his allocution, he maintained that his intentions were good and that the family should have supported Jeremy's dreams more enthusiastically. His primary regret seemed to be getting caught rather than the underlying betrayal of trust. The family dynamics have permanently shifted. My grandmother has remained close with those of us who protected her interests. But she's essentially downed my parents and Jeremy. At 85, she's sharp enough to understand that they put her home at risk to fund business ventures they knew were failing. My relationships with my cousins and Uncle David have strengthened considerably. We formed a kind of chosen family based on mutual respect and shared experience. My Uncle David jokes that he got his business property and a nephew he actually likes spending time with out of the deal. I've had no contact with my parents or Jeremy since their sentencing hearings. They're facing financial ruin from legal fees, restitution obligations, and the loss of their own home, which was ultimately sold to pay creditors. I feel no satisfaction in their situation, but I also feel no obligation to help them recover from consequences they brought on themselves. Several extended family members have apologized for initially pressuring me to work things out with my parents. My cousin Sandra in particular has been thoughtful about acknowledging how the family's enablement of Jeremy's behavior contributed to the escalation of fraud. She's become one of my strongest supporters and frequently visits the cottage with her own family. The cottage itself has become an even more meaningful refuge, knowing that I fought for it, and one has made every weekend there feel like a small victory. I've made some improvements with part of the settlement money, a new dock for the lake, better insulation for winter visits, and a small guest cabin where family members I actually want to spend time with can stay comfortably. I've also used some of the settlement funds to establish a small scholarship program for business students at the local community college, specifically targeting those who demonstrate both entrepreneurial interest and ethical decision-making. It's my way of supporting legitimate business dreams while honoring the lessons learned from Jeremy's fraudulent schemes. Looking back, the hardest part wasn't the legal battle or even the financial threat to my cottage. It was accepting that my parents were willing to steal my future to enable Jeremy's delusions of entrepreneurial success. They raised me to value hard work and honesty, then betrayed those values when it suited their purposes. But I've also learned that family loyalty doesn't require accepting abuse or fraud. Standing up for myself led to justice for multiple victims and prevented my parents from continuing their schemes against other families. Sometimes protecting yourself means protecting others too. The cottage stands secure. The family has been rebuilt around mutual respect rather than enabling, and justice was served through legal channels rather than personal revenge. It took 8 months of legal battles, but the system worked exactly as it should when evidence is documented and proper procedures are followed. My advice to anyone facing similar situations: document everything. Hire competent legal representation immediately, and don't let family guilt prevent you from protecting yourself. The people who truly love you won't ask you to absorb the consequences of their bad decisions. And sometimes, the family you choose is better than the family you're born into. I'm spending this weekend at the cottage with my Uncle David and his family watching his kids fish from the dock I bought with settlement money. It's exactly the kind of family gathering I always wanted. People who respect each other, support each other honestly, and would never dream of forging each other's signatures. The cottage is safe. The family has healed around new principles, and I can finally move forward without looking over my shoulder. Justice served, lessons learned, and life rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect rather than blind loyalty. Some stories end with reconciliation and forgiveness. This one ends with accountability and the peace that comes from standing up for yourself when it matters most.